Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium's third in a series of webinars on mitigating geopolitical risks at the tactical and operational levels to build your resilient enterprise. Today we'll be focused on this topic, and we look forward to your active responses in the chat and/or the polling questions. We really appreciate you taking the time today to join us on building an evolving resilient enterprise and synergizing your tactical and operations decisions aligned to geopolitical risks. We hope that your family are happy and safe. And just as an overview, this is the third in a series of webinars. We've had a webinar on strategic geopolitical risk back in November. We sent out a short snippet of that just yesterday. If you didn't receive it, please let us know. Linking finance and supply chain worlds was our last webinar on the 30th. And of course, we're focused on mitigating geopolitical risks at the tactical and operational levels for this webinar. And then we're going to get down and dirty at how do you identify those supply chain risks early on so you can make those real-time decisions to help you. And that's our next webinar. And then creating growth in your company while leveraging the risk landscape. Those are our upcoming webinars. If you have any other ideas of webinars that you would like to hear, please do let us know. We're very open and flexible. Again, we appreciate you joining us. Please do enter into the chat. My name is Jim DeVries, founder of Enhance International Group. I will be the host of today's webinar. And we also have Connor Fitcham from the Uphaven Group of South Africa, who's going to help us field questions in the chat. Greg's been at this consortium, founder of the consortium for over 14 years now. Greg, a few words of introduction.
You bet, Jim. Thanks a lot. Pleasure to be here with you today to talk about our passion with a little bit of a twist. I'm the founder of the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. As Jim said, we've been in business for a little over 14 years now. I've taught supply chain risk and ERM, enterprise risk management, at Lehigh University here in the States and Villanova over the last 10 years. Spent 8 years with IBM as a supply chain exec consultant. Spent 30 years, perhaps like you all, as a practitioner in supply chain across Fortune 100 companies. And I've taught supply chain management at 4 other universities during my career, ending up with becoming the president of Apex, now ASCM. So great to be with you and look forward to a great dialogue. Jim?
Thanks, Greg. And a little bit on my background. I'm a nuclear engineer and mechanical electrical engineer, physics background, which we'll see that comes into play with our case study. But overall, my core belief is that success starts in discovering the untapped potential in your employees, from the leadership down to the shop floor, including the suppliers and customers. So we live in an ecosystem. It's all about developing others that we can excel in building the resilient enterprise. With that, we'll get started and just talk about the deliverables today. The first deliverable being the tools to link strategic geopolitical risks to tactical operational activities. That's our main goal here, is to link those things together. And then we're going to get into the supply chain tactics and operations aligned to a geopolitical risk event. And that we'll cover in our case study. And then we'll get into the new supply chain priorities in a post-globalization era. And then the other topic we'll touch on is how industry leaders are approaching this linkage. And with that, we're really talking about, this challenge is how do we plan for unseen high impact events? And we know that these high impact strategic events cause 86% of the impact, leading to significant market decline. although they are only 6% of the time we spend on these. So just think about that. These type of risks we're talking about cause 86% of the impact to your company, and yet we only typically spend 6% of our time on them. So that sets us up for Greg to give an overview on the consortium. Greg?
You bet, Jim. Thanks a lot. Yeah, we call that the infamous strategic risk paradox. And we'll talk more about that during the day. But here's a quick profile of who we are and what we do. On the right-hand side, you can see we've broken out our products and services into 3 pillars. We do a lot of education. The first pillar, we do about 20 some odd webinars and workshops around the globe every year. We do a lot of consulting from soup to nuts, from supply chain to process improvement to supply chain risk and resiliency. And then on the right-hand side, we have a host of software companies, software as a service, all cloud-based, that essentially do track and trace and supply chain mapping support. Those companies support our supply chain risk and resiliency vision from our book. On the left-hand side, 5 areas. We have 2 online certificate courses. One is a basic course in supply chain risk and resiliency, where you get a certificate, self-paced, 3 levels. The other second certificate course is supply chain risk management, geared specifically to public healthcare supply chains, which we are very, very engaged in at the moment. We do coaching and consulting. We mentioned we have supply chain risk and resiliency platform solutions to do the heavy lifting when you want to scale up. And we have 2 online assessments. One is supply chain management online readiness, which we're going to talk about today. That gets into evaluating your supply chain process maturity and inherent risk. The other is a brand new one. It's called Prescriptive Online Supply Chain Risk and Resiliency 90-Day Action Plan. It is a set of surveys, and it essentially evaluates and positions what risk where you are in a risk maturity curve, what's your risk appetite, what's your risk culture, and gives you action plans, all driven by AI ML algorithms. So with that, I'll turn it back to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And a little bit about Enhance International Group. We're a group of over 50 consultants, consulting companies, and software as a service providers. And we focus on your enterprise and enabling your people to perform at their highest performance levels. EIG serves as a master integrator for you to find the best and the brightest companies to help you grow. Synergistically, our team is dedicated to empowering your organization's workforce by leveraging EIG's partners' tenured expertise. Our goal is to provide collective, collaborative, experienced thought leadership to enable organizations to deliver self-sustaining, positive margin growth. The competitive advantage focusing on short 90-day programs. Reviewing the slide, we're trying to link strategy to execution, and it's not just about one size fits all. It's about finding out how you fit in that ecosystem. Of course, geopolitical risks are those outside risks that you can look at. So you, as you see here, as a guy riding a bicycle and driving that strategy is his front wheel, and the execution, of course, is getting you there. And now you have the geopolitical risks and the landscape that's changing all the time, mountains and valleys, storms of different types that have to be overcome. And from our perspective, a strongly linked strategy to execution ecosystem results in positive momentum for your company, its employees, customers, suppliers, and shareholders. Today, we will focus on those geopolitical risks and seeing how we can positively address them and mitigate against those in your ecosystem. So with that, we're going to get started on the agenda. Greg?
You bet. Thanks, Jim. We'll give you our agenda kind of looks like this, folks. First, we'll get into common geopolitical risks according to ChatGPT. Not sure if you use that, but we are sticking our toe in the ChatGPT generative AI arena, and we'll give you some other perspectives on geopolitical risks as well. Then our next section will be tactical and operational supply chain risk definitions, kind of get you grounded, talk a little bit about disciplines in supply chain and time horizons. Next, our third section, we'll get into linking these geopolitical risks to the tactical and operational landscape. And then we'll move into section 4. Jim's got a pretty detailed case study for you in terms of geopolitical risks and their impacts. And then we'll finish up with extracting some valuable takeaways for you, more or less helpful hints. So that's our game plan for today, 5 sections. I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. So the first thing we'll get into in these geopolitical risks is we're going to ask you the question, what geopolitical risks are impacting you? And if so, how are they impacting your business? So we throw out this question. You can enter in the chat, and Connor will make sure that these get into this Wordle here. And we'll be coming back to this after we cover this section. So start thinking about what geopolitical risks are impacting you and your company, and how are they impacting your business. And as you can see, some of the geopolitical risks that we'll be covering today include these 4 here, and we'll get to that right in a few minutes. With that, we want to start with what are the leaders saying? What are the CEOs saying? And we subscribe to Fortune CEO Daily with Alan Murray. If you don't subscribe, it's a great way to just get a pulse of what's going on and what's being talked about in the world. And this is last week. This 7 days ago, there was a quote here: geopolitical risks are the top source of concern for CEOs we surveyed, outranking rising regulation, which came in second. Inflation concerns fell to third place, with only 27% ranking it among their top 3 concerns, compared to 51% in a previous survey. So we've turned the tide on inflation being the hot topic as it is today, and geopolitical risks are up there. And also, interestingly enough, the labor and skill shortages, which were pretty close to the top last year, have fallen off even more. Probably low unemployment for the last few quarters has pushed that to the bottom of the list. But as I said, this is the hot topic of the day: geopolitics and the risks associated with. So what we did is we first went out to our buddies, ResiLink, who's been with the consortium, Greg, I think since the beginning, since you started, long-term partner of the consortium. And they have a very nice paper out there, their website, and they provide very good insights. So they have their top 5 or 6 here. We'll try to hit some of them. The Red Sea crisis. I think everybody is pretty well acquainted with this, about Yemen and the Houthi group in the straits there in Bab Mandab at the southern tip of the Red Sea. So this is causing a lot of shipment problems, especially for Maersk and British Petroleum, and they've suspended shipments and halted operations in this area. So now they're having to go all the way around the world, so to speak, around the Cape Horn or through the Panama Canal to get to the U.S. So this is causing quite a bit of disruptions. The second one, of course, is the Israeli Hamas war, and there we, of course, seeing a lot of consternation, a lot of challenges there because of that war and how to support both sides to get what they need to settle that conflict. And the implications there are quite a bit on the technology side, because Israel is a very high-tech nation, and so they're going through a lot of consternation. The third one is the Russia-Ukraine war, of course, and the Russia-NATO tensions that are ensuing from that. And we're over 2 years now. And of course, there's a lot of problems here as far as supply chain. It hit more on the energy crisis, the wheat, a lot of the different food groups, especially in Europe, of getting cheap food throughout Europe. So that's caused quite a bit of challenges there. And then the US elections and global elections. And if you don't know it, there's over 50 elections this year. So over 50% of the world is voting this year. This is like a record of all time. So there's quite a bit of turmoil, not just in the US, but across the world in election fever year. So there's, of course, a lot of turning over governments, going in different directions, and trying to deal with all these other challenges. And then number 5, of course, is long U.S.-China tensions and the critical minerals. That is a big issue right now. Is who's going to get the semi-precious metals, all the things you need to make batteries. And so there's a lot of tensions there, as well as in China and with Taiwan, with the tensions from a chip manufacturing perspective. So this is their top 6. There's no right or wrong here. SPC Global has another list where they include other things like climate change, cyber attacks, future pandemics, deglobalization, and energy security that we don't see on Resilinks. Greg, a few comments?
Yeah, you bet. Resilink's been a great friend of the consortium. They do a lot of heavy lifting. In fact, I think Resilink has almost 1 million facilities that they are rating every quarter within their community database. So they are on the ground, providing a lot of on the ground in country data to folks like us and their clients and their members. So, again, Jim mentioned there's no right or wrong, but these are potentially existential risks for all of us, meaning if it impacts us, do we have a plan? And if not, it could be rather devastating. So we're trying to share with you different perspectives from different organizations relative to their perspective on geopolitical risks.
Thanks, Greg. And now we'll drum roll for ChatGPT to see what do they say are the top 6. And probably if you ran it today, it might be different. This was done a week or 2 ago. But again, you see the top 3 are, top 2 at least are pretty similar. Number 3, supply chain resilience in Asia, infers a lot of the things we've already discussed. Number 4, I thought was interesting that they did bring in energy security and transition. There are a lot of attacks on energy and infrastructure now with the cyber attacks, which also plays in quite often. And then climate change and environmental policies, especially in Europe and the US, they are, whether you're for or against it, I think it's like, it's tough to be a business where the momentum is moving in one direction, you try to align in one direction, and then policy changes to another direction. So that costs companies quite a bit of money, changing direction all the time on whether to stay or should we go on some of these challenges. Of course, we have the global health challenges, that we're all familiar with COVID-19, but there's always that next virus, and then protectionism and trade policy shifts. So it feels like we're going into a more insular world today, where people countries are becoming more insular and trying to, feels in a way we're going back to the Cold War. Many people say we're going back into that for a multitude of reasons. It is what it is. The question isn't, is it happening? The question is, what are you doing to protect your company's growth in this? And where are your risks, and how are you mitigating those risks going forward? Greg, your thoughts?
Yeah, you bet. It's there's a lot of uncertainty out there in the VUCA world, especially driven by these geopolitical issues. So it's always interesting to see ChatGPT. We are sticking our toe in the AI ML arena using some algorithms for our online survey reports and so forth. It's going to be a bumpy ride, folks, for the rest of this year. So that's why we felt compelled to kind of give you some helpful hints about how to potentially mitigate some of these geopolitical risks.
So let's see what else we got in here. We got Russia. Some folks said Russia, Russia, Russia. Came up a bit. I saw in the chat from our friend Bob Shoreway that we have some challenges in the aging demographics going across the world, as China has it, Japan has it, the US has it, as we all are going into this higher living. Everybody wants to have the cell phone, the house, everybody wants to have all the latest gadgets. You know, what happens to the family, the family unit, where we used to have a lot of children and now we don't. So that's the impact of all those things are happening across the world and in all the countries. As we live longer, we have to pay for people to live longer, and they work for retirement, and people say, well, I want to retire for 50 years. Well, it used to be you retire for 10 years before you passed away. God help you, rest your soul. But now that's changing. So there's always something new here, that and how governments approach this from a geopolitical perspective is quite interesting. Greg, your thoughts?
Yep, you bet. Just wanted to put a bow on this discussion on rare earth elements, what we call REEs. We do a lot of work with the U.S. government and Department of Defense, and they're actually starting to come around to understand that for the warfighting folks, at least the agencies in the United States, that guess where we get our raw materials, rare earth elements for our warfighting agencies, not here, elsewhere. So they're actually coming around and starting to get engaged in mapping where the raw materials go into their tier one OEMs to build warfighting material and equipment. So that's very encouraging to us, because we've been advocating that to look more strategic over the last 5 years. So I just wanted to put a bow on that rare earth element issue.
And to put a bow on that, just to reinforce that, they had a segment on 60 Minutes last Sunday on that particular topic, and the mining of REEs in the Pacific Ocean, and what China is doing, what the US is doing, and so forth. So if you haven't seen that, you might want to look that up if you're interested. That is certainly a hot topic, especially with electric cars and the need for those. With that, we'll try to move on to the next section. Greg.
You bet. You bet. Our second section here, folks, is to talk a little bit about tactical and operational supply chain risk definitions, some disciplines, and some time horizons, just to kind of get you grounded on supply chain risk resiliency and metrics. So let's take a look at some definitions. We want to touch on two today because this is our theme. First, one of the one of the supply chain risk definitions is tactical risk. What do we mean by that? Well, these risks are related mainly to your external issues with your suppliers and your customers outside of your supply chain per se. Include, look at them, quality, late deliveries. We all live with these. Service failures, customers, supplier fires in their warehouses. Some suppliers will go out of business. So these are what we consider tactical risks geared towards your suppliers and your customers. The other definition we want to share with you is, excuse me, operational risks. What are these? There's a disproportionate set of supply chain risks that we categorize as operational, since they include mainly internal processes that you and your company say you control within your supply chain. Things like quality, computer issues, forecasting, all the classical supply chain planning and execution, which we say we control. That's what we call operational risks, and they align themselves with your day-to-day level of frontline personnel and frontline management. So I think we can all probably relate to these risks because we live with them every day, but we wanted to get you grounded on these two definitions. All right. Next, we want to kind of put a bow tie again on our discussion of risks. And we want to make sure we get this across to you that not all risks are the same. That's the driver for this slide. So let's take a look. This slide and graph comes from a friend, a colleague way back when, Dr. Crandall, and he used to teach supply chain management here in the States at Appalachian State. He was a big Apex producer and a friend of Apex. And this comes from the Apex magazine way back in 2014. He did a terrific study. It was about 3 months across all industries and came up with this synopsis. All right, let's take a look graphically. On the left, the y-axis, he put in the magnitude and frequency of risks on the y-axis. On the x-axis, on the bottom, he picked 3 classic sources of disruption: internal, external, and natural disasters. All good there, all right? And third, the frequency, the legend down in the bottom. I hope Jim can bring up the legend on the bottom. The legend on the bottom left, the blue line represented the frequency of risk occurrences, and the green line you'll see in a minute represent the financial impacts. So let's just take a look at the lines and the 3 areas. On the left, from an internal source of risks, there's our operational or chronic risks. What do you see there? You see very high frequency. The blue line indicates that these types of risks happen every day, every shift, constantly. And take a look at the green line. Green line is very low in terms of the magnitude. So the business impact of these frequent chronic risks is very low, and therefore we tend not to fix them. Let's go to the middle. External source of disruption. That's our tactical suppliers and customers. As you can see, the blue line, the frequency of events tends to drop precipitously over time, but the green line, the financial negative impact to your company, can grow quite substantially. The third type of source of disruption on the right-hand side is strategic, or what we're calling today geopolitical risks. Take a look at the frequency. The blue line has dropped precipitously again in terms of the frequent use or the frequency of the events, but take a look at the green line. it grows almost, exponentially, really. And this is what we talked about in terms of the strategic paradox. So we wanted to share that with you graphically to give you a sense of not all risks are the same. All right, let's take a look at another graph where we can get you grounded a bit. This is the classical supply chain planning time horizons. If you're in supply chain, you get certified by ASCM. This is what you learn about in terms of a linear supply chain from left to right. Let's take a look. On the left-hand side, we have strategic planning. What does that include? Normally, supply chain network design, network analysis, building capacity, production capacity, and perhaps doing business planning. All right. What's the time horizon on the bottom? You're normally looking anywhere from 1 to 5 years out into the future. Next, moving left to right, tactical planning, demand planning, inventory planning, distribution resource planning, which is really MRP, folks, out in the field in your warehouses and distribution areas, transportation, and maybe even in this element, sales and operations planning, because the time frame on the bottom is about 1 to 18 months. And then you have operational planning over on the right-hand side. We kind of put it in there in the blue box as the scheduling miracle happens here. This is getting into scheduling your facilities to produce product. All right. We call it the miracle happens here, a little levity there in the morning for us, but the operational timeline is anywhere from 0 to 30 days. And then beyond that, it's the make, really the manufacturer, and that MES is manufacturing execution systems. So you do strategic planning, then tactical, then operational, make the product, get it out the door to the customer via transportation, maybe even you're sending and doing and managing VMI, which we call vendor managed inventory. So we wanted to give you a couple of grounding slides, and with that, we'll move on to our next section. Our third section for you today is linking geopolitical risks to the tactical and operational landscape. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. Another one of our friends here, Allianz, puts out this country risk atlas quarterly, and it's based on typical risks that you see by country. And the red is, of course, the high risk, the orange is the medium risk, and the green is the low risk. And looking ahead, challenges, of course, are abound right now, from liquidity constraints to growing public and private debt, and from geopolitical tensions to increasing business insolvencies. The global economic landscape remains fraught with risks. These elements underscore the importance of leveraging Allianz's Atlas as a critical tool for risk assessment and strategic planning. The Country Risk Atlas, updated quarterly, provides a comprehensive insights on the economic, political, and business environment and sustainability factors that influence non-payment risk for companies in 84 economies. So, and bottom line is your company solvent or not? And where can you operate to maintain your solvency? So with that, from our perspective, from the consortium's perspective, we look at the financial risk and how they interact with your supply chain, your risks within your four walls, and how you're seeing that from a financial perspective. And we view this as a trifecta of sorts of proactively identifying, assessing, mitigating, and managing your risks, which is our mantra within the consortium. With that, we'll talk about, again, the geopolitical risks is that fourth dimension of these risks that we've been talking about. And so it's really, how do you manage your within your four walls, and then taking into account these risks, how are you going to manage your supply chain, plan, source, make, deliver, your risks from a tactical customer and supplier perspective, the operational, and that chronic perspective that Greg just brought up? And then financially, how are you going to make sure that you maintain your cash flow, you don't have excessive debt, and you have good financial management? Greg, your thoughts?
You bet. We kind of call this the sphere of influence, or the great triumvirate: supply chain, risk, and finance. So, and if you've been on some of our webinars, I think last year we were talking about linking finance and supply chain together, because those are two very powerful organizations, especially in a manufacturing company, and a lot of synergies to be had, and competitive advantage when all three of these groups or disciplines talk and leverage their strengths.
Absolutely. Greg?
You bet. We thought we would give you another little perspective. Here's a different perspective on new priorities in the post-globalization era. That's what Bain calls it. This comes from Bain, the #1 consultancy at the moment in operational management. They share a lot of information with us. On the left-hand side of the clock, if you will, these are the classic elements of good supply chain management. Take a look, reducing cost, optimizing inventory, driving growth, and improving service and quality. All the things that we get paid for if you're in supply chain management. However, on the right-hand side of the clock are new drivers, according to Bain, and we would agree, because of what? Because of these geopolitical risks. Take a look at them. Increasing resiliency in your supply chain, improving sustainability, and on the bottom right, growing responsiveness to your customers' needs and expectations, and risk management. So we wanted to share with you some new priorities because of the geopolitical risks. So with that, I'll turn it back to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And we'll get into the case study now that we researched here on we'll call it unintended geopolitical consequences. And to put this together, I was able to pull a lot of this off the web. It's all open source information. And these were the top folks that I was able to use their information to put together this story. So love to hear your feedback on what I view as an unintended geopolitical consequences that has unwound over the last few years, but actually started with Chernobyl. So if you were around back then, Chernobyl happened in '86. There was a nuclear cloud of smoke from the graphite filled reactor that caught on fire, and that caused a lot of havoc across the world. Everybody was worried about that nuclear cloud going across the world. If you're around, you may recall that. And what happened in Germany? Well, in Germany, they had over 1 million protesters on their nuclear power plants because they thought, well, if it happened in Chernobyl, it could happen in their backyard. But of course, Chernobyl is a graphite-cooled reactor, one of the only ones in the world, totally different style reactor than the ones they have in Germany and France and the rest of the world. So that caused a lot of protest within Germany, and eventually they decided to shut down the plants. And then they decided that was going to happen in 2000, and that by 2000 they had planned on it. And then in 2009 they canceled it, and then in 2010 they protested again, and then the great tsunami for Fukushima happened, and another disaster, which was completely unrelated to what could ever happen in Germany, but it didn't matter. They said, oh, we got to shut them down. Japan shut down their nuclear power plants. France has not, US has not. But then 3 days later, after the Fukushima disaster, Merkel announced, Angela Merkel, the chancellor there, announced to shutting down all the nuclear power plants. So from 2011 or so, until now, they've been working on shutting down 1/3 of their power source of nuclear power and now they're down to 3 plants. So that's what happened. And then, well, what was the result of that? Well, you have to get the power somewhere. So Germany started being very dependent on cheap Russian gas, and that became a mainstay for them. So if we take a step back and look at what did their landscape look like, they had quite a bit of 26.5 gigawatts of nuclear power across Germany, and they wanted to shut down to be 30% of all the power. So it was 30% of the power in Germany when they started, and they had to replace that power with something. So again, they replaced it with natural gas. Germany became very dependent on Russian natural gas, especially in the later 2000s. And then, of course, we had another geopolitical event that happened to cause the cutoff of natural gas from Russia. And I think we all know what that event is. We already talked about it. It was the Russia attacks Ukraine. So now the Nord Stream pipelines that were being built from Russia are now shut off. And now Germany has to find alternative sources in Europe, and that is causing higher rates. And what results is that Germany suffers an increase in energy costs, and those pipelines shut down. GDP in Germany decreases by 5% from after the war started in Ukraine. So that they're really feeling, Germany is really feeling the effects of the Ukraine war, and a lot of sacrifices on their part. And their industrial production fell by 0.8%. Energy prices increased by 600% from 2020. That's pretty significant, especially if you're an automotive manufacturer. And we all know that, you know, cars kind of started in Germany, Mercedes, obviously. And now, who is Germany's greatest opponent in cars, or whatever you want to call it, is China, right? So China is rising and making more cars than anyone right now with BYD. So that is their number one trading partner. Germany was China, and now they're becoming less competitive, and they are having high inflation, high energy prices, and weak international trade. And of course, you know, from an automotive perspective, it's really hitting them very, very, very hard. Just 3% of the companies said they plan to invest in the country, whereas 22% want to shift their investments abroad. So that's startling changes within Germany. They're really having a very difficult time. So their stability has changed quite a bit. Their GDP even went down further in 2023, turning Germany into the worst performing large economy in the world. And from an IMF perspective, you know, you look at US at 2.1%, China 5%, and the EU was dragged down to 0.7%, mainly because of Germany. So, you know, when you're the biggest person in town on the block, you know, when you fall, everybody falls. And you can see here from a competitive industrial performance index between Germany and Chinese manufacturing, the gap is closing over these last few years. So that is startling for if you're a German. And so a lot of geopolitical tensions here. So what do they need to do? So this is from The Conversation, another publication that's independent of just looking at the data and what they should be doing. And what they recommend, of course, is diversify. They have to must fix their over-reliance on China, as it's its biggest trading partner. As we mentioned before, they have to borrow to invest. They have a debt break within their constitution that doesn't allow them to run into debt in order to manage those deficits. They don't want to have deficits, and they want to attract investments abroad. to help them in Germany. So those are things they can do. Again, a lot of the traditional approaches are things that you would think, they're optimizing. Germany does optimize their factories quite well. Of course, they have a very large labor union there. So that's another thing they have to contend with. They're going to outsource major assemblies offshore. It's easy to say, but harder to do because of all those laws. Of course, they're looking at alternate energy sources as biomass, hydro, waste to energy. Of course, they have a lot of solar and wind throughout Germany today. They've invested heavily. And then there's the economic, the scheme of arrangement, which is a political economic arrangement, which is to make sure that companies do not become insolvent, but then they're kind of dependent on the state and the creditors on that. So there is this power price package in November 23 of $12 billion to help subsidize the electricity. So they are starting to act now. But from our perspective, there's things they can do more at that operational and tactical level. And we'll get into this in a few minutes, but do they have all their supply chains mapped? Have they done the what if risk scenario planning? Do they have suppliers and customers? Are they monitoring the health of their suppliers? Do they understand the solvency up and down their supply chain? And of course, monitoring their cash flow. So that's an overview of a case study of unintended consequences from shutting down nuclear power plants to what impact it could have on an economy. Quite astounding. With that, we're going to switch over to Greg. Greg?
You bet. Thanks, Jim. All right, we'll get a little more tactical with you as well. We thought we'd share with you some I'll say a good starting point perhaps for you and your team, especially relating to supply chain process maturity. All right, so we have a supply chain management process maturity assessment tool. It's free. We're going to give it to you in a second. It includes 13 tenets across the entire supply chain, and we wanted to share with you those tenets before we give you a profile of the tool. We're talking strategic, tactical, and operations here. First, we have three tenets that are what we consider strategic. They are leadership. What does your leadership look like, and propensities. We like to advocate the balanced scorecard, which is a good business pro forma type of framework, and then intentional redundancies, whether you do it or not, which means you look for alternative suppliers as well. From a tactical point of view, we have 5 tactical elements or tenets. They are demand management. How do you do that? How do you deal with your customers? Industry, not so much, it's industry nuance, because different industries have different risk levels and thresholds. Information systems, not what brand you use, but how sophisticated you are. Integrated supply chain, do you think about supply chain end to end, from suppliers to customers and back? And then finally, risk mitigation. Do you do it at all? It's almost binary, yes or no. Then on an operational side, we have 5 more tenets. They are supply chain processes. That is for the service organizations. We also have an adaptive manufacturing, which is for folks who actually make products. So we got 2 tools here. One is for service and one is for manufacturing. And then the other 4 in the operational are the same. What's your supply base look like? Do you do S&OP? We think that's important. What does your logistics inbound and outbound look like? And do you have an agile supply chain? So essentially, we go and assess the performance and process maturity of those 13 tenets, and we'll get to that in the next slide and give you a picture image of what it looks like. Here's a little more details on a starting point, perhaps for you, is to get a sense of your as-is condition relative to your supply chain maturity. So we're looking at the outcome of the tool. It's a chart. You see it in the middle. Basically, you go through the 90 some questions, 13 tenets, and we have two tools, one for service, one for manufacturing. All right. And when you get into the tool, it'll ask you a definitive question. Do you make stuff or don't you? Are you a service? Are you in public healthcare? And that sends you to the appropriate questions. The tool measures two things: your supply chain process maturity and inherent risk. How does it do that? Well, the closer, think of it, the closer you are with the black line is indicative of how you answered the questions within that tenet. Once you look at the black line, then the closer to the center, the more mature that process is and the less inherent risk you have in that process. All right. The farther away you are from the center of the chart, the less mature that process is and the more inherent risks. So again, the black line you see is essentially the as-is condition of the answers to the questions. And then you can see the three circles. Green is low risk, and that's where a lot of exemplar companies operate. Green to orange is less mature, more risk. And then from orange through the what we call affectionately the ring of fire, which is the red circle, that's still less mature process and much higher risk. All right. So our questions on the left are: where are you on your supply chain, on our supply chain maturity model? Do you have a sense of that? If not, take a look. What inherent risks do you have within those processes? And is your supply chain flexible enough to handle these geopolitical disruptions? So we always ask, how mature are your supply chain processes? We think this is a decent start. And folks, it's free. You can get into the tool and run through as many charts as you'd like to evaluate your supply chain. So we wanted to give you a pretty easy, straightforward, perhaps a starting point to handle or to evaluate your supply chain process maturity in anticipation of some of these geopolitical risks. And that gives us our last section. It's called Extracting Valuable Takeaways. So let's take a look. We'll give you some helpful hints here on this build slide. We've been talking about strategic, tactical, and operation. Again, strategic time horizon, 1 to 5 years. What are some of the risks? A loss of your facility and or your assets, of course. What are the challenges in this arena? It could be the largest amount of business loss for your company, and it could possibly be existential, which means you can't recover. And Jim talked about, can Germany, a country, recover from an existential strategic risk that seems to have compounded itself? So from a remedy point of view, we think about this. Maybe you want to think about securing a global risk alert system, a system that evaluates risks around the globe, geopositions them, and gives them to you in terms of you understanding what risk is perhaps near a couple of your facilities. Maybe understand your risk appetite. Who are you? How does your company view risk? Maybe continuous dialogue about these global risks through your executive team and escalated up to the board, and maybe some scenario planning. We'll talk about that in the next section here. Tactical score, or the tactical arena. That's 1 to 15 months. What are the risks? Supply chain disruption to your organization. What's the challenge? Ensure supply availability. What would we tell you in terms of helpful hints? Maybe you do supply chain mapping. You can do that on your own. All right, it's a facilitated kind of exercise. Takes about a half a day. Map out a small supply chain from customer to supplier and then put some risks associated with it. And if you want some help, we do that all the time. Digitization of your supply chain. You hear it all the time. Digital twins. Why would we advocate digital twins? So that you can do what if scenarios and risk planning in anticipation of these geopolitical risks. If this, then this is going to happen because, and how do I mitigate it? And then maybe you want to think about alternate supplier programs as well. And finally, in operations, what's the risk? Keeping capacity utilization high with these disruptions. What's the challenge? Maintain a viable level of production and service to your clients, to your customers. What are some of the remedies? Improve your supply chain visibility. What do we mean by that? Get better connected upstream to your suppliers and downstream through your customers. Maintain a flexible workforce, continuous communication with your suppliers and customers. So these are what we would consider best practices to potentially mitigate the geopolitical risks. With that, we'll move on to our one of our final slides. We thought we'd share this with you from our industry benchmark data. We have hundreds and hundreds of companies inside this platform at the moment. And we have some statistics for you to think about. On the left-hand side are some benchmarks from friends of the consortium. In the second column, left to right, are the KPIs. And then in the third, fourth, and fifth column to the right, these are our categories. When we evaluate a supply chain process maturity, we talk about laggards, which are low to average, moving from being average to being a follower, and then maturing up from a follower to a leader. So take a look at some of these data, some of the data points. On revenue growth margin, what's important? Customer delivery, improvement. If you move from a laggard up to a leader, we have seen this type of improvement, anywhere from 2 to 5% as a leader, measuring as you mature your supply chain process. Another one, EBITDA. Everyone seems to be using EBITDA as a good measure of performance. We would advocate capital management improvement, which is really free cash. Take a look at, from an EBITDA point of view, you can go from 1 point all the way to 6 point improvement as you improve your processes. RONA, return on net asset, that comes from our friends at Gartner. Fewer stockouts than your peers. Take a look, that's pretty impressive, going from a laggard to a leader. And then finally, free cash, or what we call cash conversion cycle. That comes from a friends at the Hackett Group. They're big on cash conversion cycle. We call it return on capital, and you can take a look at a rather very impressive improvement of cash to cash conversion with free cash, anywhere from 9% to 43% in terms of return on capital. So finally, what is supply chain process improvement worth for you? We have a little roadmap for you, and then maybe we can answer a few questions. It's kind of the roadmap to resilient enterprise. It addresses geopolitical supply chain risks. This is kind of a wrap up, kind of left to right. First and foremost, readiness assessment, performance capability. This is what's your as is condition. What are you good at? What's your strengths? What your weaknesses? And improve those through a free assessment. All right. Next, when you do that, maybe you think about a supply chain risk alert system. All right. Because why? Because in the risk globalization geopolitical arena, folks, speed to make a decision is life. Speed is life in risk management. Next, you might want to think about supplier financial analysis. We didn't talk too much about it, but there's something out there called the Altman Z-score. All right. It is a bankruptcy predictor. All you need is income statement and balance sheet, and you can calculate it. It is an algorithm that has a 95% forecast accuracy of forecasting potential bankruptcy 15 months into the future. You could do this for your suppliers, for your customers. It's free. You can find it on Wikipedia. Next, after that, maybe you do some risk assessments like we talked about. Maybe you do some scenario planning, digitizing your supply chain. Get a supply chain that is small, and maybe do a facilitated supply chain mapping exercise. It's a wow effect. It's very good start. Then mitigation. Once you identify some risks, you assess them. We would actually say maybe you want to develop a mitigation plan to be better prepared if, in fact, these geopolitical risks occur. And that all leads to, at the end game, more resilient growth. All right, maturing your supply chain in order to mitigate the geopolitical risks. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And thank you all for joining us today. And we hope you enjoyed the webinar. We welcome any questions you have today or after the webinar. You'll feel free to contact us directly. You all have our email addresses. Please let us know if this was what you expected, or if you want more of this or less of that. As a wrap up, these were our deliverables. Any questions or comments on these are welcome. Thank you for your comments, everyone in the chat. If you have any questions, please do ask them. We appreciate that you enjoyed the webinar. We enjoyed giving this webinar. It's our passion and our love. So we certainly look forward to future webinars. In the view of time here, we'll wrap it up here. Our next webinar will be making real-time supply chain risk decisions. This is more in that very short time period of a risk and what you can do now. So we'll be focused more. We went from the high level, geopolitical level. Now we're going to go more at that day-to-day level, how we can make improvements right away within your supply chain. And with that, again, thank you for joining us. Greg, a few words.
You bet, Jim. We provided you a few insights into the world of geopolitical risks and how they can impact your supply chain. So we attempted to also provide a few helpful hints in terms of mitigating those impacts of the global risks to ensure maybe that your supply chain can, as the U.S. Marines here in the States say, assess, adapt, and overcome. All the best.
Thanks, Greg. And again, many thanks to all those who joined and commented throughout the webinar. My thoughts are, with the complexity of mitigating geopolitical risks at the tactical and operational levels, it takes diligence to know what to work on first, second, and third. We have a lot of different tools and approaches to help you come to that conclusion. There are systematic ways to proactively manage risks that could wipe out all the margin that you gained in your first quarter or second quarter can be wiped out just by a geopolitical or any strategic risk out there. The question is, are you ready? Are you ready for those? And are you faster than your nearest competitor to recover from those risk events to make you the most competitive offering in the marketplace? Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to joining future webinars. And please keep those emails going after the webinar. We look forward to your thoughts and ideas. All the best.